Okay, we're live. So just going to pause for a couple seconds because it gets grungy if I don't. 1, 2, 3, 4. In a coffee shop in a city, which is every coffee shop in every city. Just every day. Hi, friends. Welcome to the 14th episode of Barista Unfiltered. I am Jodie Lee.
And I'm Emily.
And you didn't hear Austin, I don't think. Maybe you heard Austin, but Austin's with us today. We're your hosts, and we are so glad you've joined us again. Our guest is Emily Perez, and she is a former barista who used to work with Austin at Spike's Coffee Shop in San Francisco, right there in the Castro. And today she is living and breathing and learning as a beauty advisor. So we're going to hear all about that today and her barista stories. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it's really exciting.
So the first thing we always ask is, like, what kind of coffee do you like to drink first thing in the morning?
First thing in the morning, what I really, really want is 3 espresso shots over ice with just a little bit of half and half. Like, I think that's what really gets me going. It lets me get through like my morning hump. That's my wake up call. It's 3 espresso shots. Or if I'm feeling lazy, I'll have some cold brew like laying in the fridge that I bought from like Trader Joe's and pour a little bit in a cup and call it a day.
So where'd you go this morning?
This morning I went to Lee's Sandwich Shop, which is in the Tenderloin where I live, and I had Vietnamese iced coffee because I had time to like actually like wake up and like get like, open my emails and be like, okay, now I get to go have coffee since it was my day off.
What is Vietnamese coffee?
Vietnamese coffee is like this really intense, like it's almost like really bitter, dark roast coffee with condensed milk in it. And they just pour it over ice, and it's bitter but sweet. It's I don't know, it's just the most delicious thing you'll ever have, and it's super sugary, but it's probably...
Is that similar to Thai iced coffee?
Yes. It's like Thai iced tea where it's like super sugary, but you're like, I need to drink the whole thing. Like, I will drink the sugar. It's just super sweet and just caramelized almost. I don't know. It's delicious.
I've never heard of that. Is that something you guys serve at Spike's?
No. Because there's a Thai restaurant like right across the street from us, so we don't really want... Was that your ukulele?
No, that's my grandpa's banjo.
Oh, wow.
I just had it fixed. Don't worry, it just fell on carpet. It's fine. It's actually my great-grandfather's banjo. I'll show it to you.
But it's fine.
It is remarkable in that it has tobacco spit on it. If you're watching on,
wow.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing it. Anyway, sorry about that. Go ahead. So you don't serve it because there's a Thai restaurant, which you took me to, and it was delicious.
Right across the street. Yeah, and so that we don't really want to be stepping on their territory. Yeah. We've actually had people ask us to make it, but like, they're right across the street, so they can go there for that. They can come to Spike's for everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, is that something that you find at a lot of Thai restaurants? I've never noticed it.
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
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 Okay.
It's usually like that. A lot of times I'll give it to you for free, even.
Yeah. I think it's more like, I definitely have to say, like, it's definitely a San Francisco, California thing where it's kind of like, it's very in to go get Thai. Like, I feel like you're, when they ask you, like, where do you want to go to dinner? You're not like, oh, I don't know, just go get a burger. You're like, ooh, Thai food. Yeah. Like, that's your common basic food.
Yeah.
I think, like, as a San Franciscan, as spoiled as that sounds, like, that's what our basic, like, oh, I don't know what to get for dinner, so I guess I'll just get Thai.
Yeah.
Like,
that's
so
awesome.
I think that's why for us
it's not like special going out to eat.
You're not like, let's go get Thai food. And then, like, oh no, it's just down the street. Let's get Thai food.
I've been in a conversation with Austin that ended like that. Let's just go get Thai.
Yeah. It's just, that's, I don't know, it's the new Chinese food. This is
pretty much.
Like, it's just convenient. Yeah, it's just super convenient.
Okay, so back to what you normally drink with the 3 shots and half and half. Is there a name for that drink, or is that just like an Emily special?
I want to say that's just like a drink that I've made over like survival periods. That's a drink I drank in college when I was getting through finals and papers. And that's just like the drink that I've always just kind of had, like working in and out of coffee shops and like trying out different things. And like, that's what I like. I just like 3 shots over ice.
A lot of baristas too. I feel like we all like from behind the counter, we like come up with our particular little formulation of what we like. And then you don't want to be that, because you know what it's like to be on the other side of the counter. You don't want to be that person that
like difficult.
But at the same time, you're like in line and you're like, oh shit, how am I going to explain this?
Right.
That's like not a pain in the ass.
So I usually just go, I'm like, can you just put 3 shots over ice? And then I'll just pour the half and half on my end. Be like, I don't need to tell you exactly how much. Like, I just want half of the cup.
Yeah.
Not 3/4, just half.
Awesome. Well, I know Austin's got a lot of questions for you because you guys are old buds. So I'm going to just turn over to Austin at this point and just enjoy.
So Emily, I know like when you started working at Spikes, you were not a newbie to the coffee world, which is always a dream when you hire somebody and they know what they're doing. Where did you get your start? Where was your first shop?
Yeah, I mean, I have pretty much worked in coffee since I turned 18. My first coffee experience was at a Starbucks. I worked at a Starbucks inside of a Target that's actually not too close from where I live currently. And the only reason I even got into said Target was because a friend of mine started working summers there, and she was like, she's like, it's 20 minutes away walking, 15 or 10 if we're on the bus, like just work there, it's super convenient. And she would recommend me and Chash like back, like, oh, if she stays for 3 months, like you get $100 bonus. Yeah. So that was one of the actual reasons as to why I even like chose that Starbucks inside of that Target. And I ended up just staying there for 2 years, actually. I stayed there for 2 years.
Wow, that's a really good idea. Yeah. Actually, I wonder if Joe, instead of putting an ad up on Craigslist or whatever, and we're looking for a new barista, I wonder if we could do something like that. That's a pretty good idea, actually, because it's right now in San Francisco, it's very hard to find people because the labor market is pretty saturated at this point, and there's more and more cafes, but there's less and less people who can afford to work in cafes because it's so expensive to live here. Right. So it's pretty competitive when you get those people. That's a good idea. I'm gonna talk to Joe.
Did she split the commission with you?
She didn't, because the only main reason we were doing all of this and I started to get kind of serious about working was because we wanted to go to LA to go to Disneyland for a summer, just like a girls trip. And that was just like the goal of that summer. It wasn't even like, I'm going to stay here and work for 2 years. It was like, I'm going to work and just for the summer until we get enough money for the trip and that you get your bonus and that we could go out like to our vacation. And somehow I ended up staying there for 2 years.
And she worked with a former employee of Spikes, who we may be talking to soon, and recommended her from Starbucks. Yes. So you went straight from Starbucks to Spikes, right?
No. So I actually have worked at a couple of coffee places, actually. So I first started working at Starbucks, and then I left there, and I actually went to be a TA for 1.5 years for some high school teachers. Who did some peer resources classes here at San Francisco, like in the public schools district. So I basically worked there for 1.5 years, did that while I was also kind of doing Starbucks on the side. And after my job with both Starbucks and the school kind of closed down, I was looking for something a little bit more relaxed and less corporate. Like I wanted to go some more neighborhoody. I wanted to not feel like it was just a job where I was clocking in. I was actually, invested in the store and wanting to make sure that the place was nice, that people enjoyed their time there. And I just really enjoyed that aspect of working in coffee. And I didn't get that from working at Starbucks.
Yeah.
So I went to another neighborhood coffee shop on Polk. And I was working there for about 1.5 years.
And is that in the TL?
It's on Polk in Washington. So I would say it's more in the Nob Hill part of town. But I worked there for about almost 2 years until they closed it down because rents there. I don't know if you are familiar with Polk now, or gentrification here in the city is definitely something that you encounter every day, especially me, who's been kind of a local here and, has grown up and kind of seen the city flourish as one. And that place on Polk, it was very popular, but it just wasn't sustainable as far as the rent. The land, or the guy who owned the building, like raised the rent to something kind of like, I don't know. I think we were paying like $2,000-$3,000 a month, and he raised it to something like $7,000. And the people who own the coffee shop were just like, that's just not something feasible.
And that's happening to a lot of the old school coffee shops here in San Francisco.
So and that closed down. But I was working there. That's actually where I ran into Angela. I had been working there for, like I said, almost 1.5 years, almost 2. And she had come in towards the end of kind of like the era of the coffee shop. She came in and worked with us towards like the last 4 or 5 months there. So that's when we kind of reconnected again. And that's when that place closed down. I think that's when she came in, started working for you guys.
Okay.
Well, I did not yet because I hadn't heard about you guys.
And then what happened next?
After that, I took a little break from working. And then just did my nanny gigs that I've been doing kind of on and off. By the way, I have a ton of jobs. It's not that I'm just eternally broke. It's just that I enjoy being active and just doing things and not just kind of sitting and doing one thing. Like I'm somebody that if I'm not doing 80,000 things, like I'm not happy.
If you're not watching the YouTube, you're probably missing out on the fact that the amount of energy coming from Emily is profound. So I totally believe her. And we're just thrilled that you fit us into your busy schedule.
And she's able to do this at 6 a.m. Yeah. I've witnessed this.
I mean, I feel like it's just, people are definitely, it's some hard times right now. I think we're living in some pretty tough situations day to day with government, with, how the city's changing, even with your own moods day to day, and with the things that you're struggling behind closed doors and whatnot. But like, I mean, as much as I like to get stuck in a mood, sometimes it's just not, it's not a good thing for you. You can't just be like, let it bring you down all the time. Yeah. So I think just being busy and staying, just doing things that you want to do and things that can help you do whatever you want to do, whether that be traveling or just, enjoying where you're living and being able to pay your bills, just go in with a good attitude and things sometimes will
I think sometimes working in coffee kind of like, it is a direct challenge to overcome that because you have to be in front of people and you have to be functional and you can't like hold yourself up in a little cubicle and just sort of scowl all day. Like you actually have to like overcome the internal strife that's going on and like actually, and something that works. I mean, like if I'm in an awful mood and I go into work and I like force myself, then it's like, it's a useful skill.
Yeah. I think, you're compartmentalizing a lot of the things that you need to do. Like, if I go to work, I can't go and just like start crying in the middle of like making a latte. That being said, I have dealt with baristas who like have, been dealing with some hard times and they're like, I can't be here right now. And I'm like, that's fine. I totally get that. Being in front of people is hard. Yeah. It's hard.
That moment when you look at your coworker and you're like, okay,
I gotta go.
Like, I cannot reasonably ask this person to suck it up right now.
I can't do
like there are times when you can. And you can look at somebody and you can be like, hey, suck it up. Like, we all got problems. But then there's that special time when you look at somebody and you're like, no, that would be the worst thing that I could possibly say right now. Please just go collect yourself and do what you need to do.
Like take a breather. It's cool.
Yeah. So when you came into Spikes, what were your first impressions there?
I instantly was like befuddled, like just completely and totally befuddled. So the reason I came into interview with Spikes is I was transitioning out of a job that was putting a lot of time constraints with my schedule because I was still going to college. And just our times were clashing. And I had reached out to Angela just touched bases. I was like, hey, how are you? How are things? And she's like, I'm good. You know, I'm working at this place on Castro. And she was telling me all these things. And I was like, well, are they hiring? Like, I'm like, you're hyping this all up. Like, I need to go see, like, are they hiring? They're like, you know what? My manager actually just left for like he's just like crossing the country. They're driving across country or something. And I'm like, what? He's just like, yeah, you know, he's like, you'll love them. Like, you'll meet them. You'll sit down. They're awesome. And when I came in for my interview, actually, it was on Halloween day. So Austin came in, I came in to Spike's, and I was like, I got to the counter and I was like, hi, I'm looking for Austin. And this man painted in full blue, purple, indigo paint turns around and goes, oh, hey, are you Emily? And I'm like, am I? Yes, I am. That is me. And I just remember him being like, oh, by the way, like, yeah, it's like, we're just waiting for Joe to get here. He told me he's on his way. Shouldn't be more than 10 minutes. And I'm talking to this man in full blue paint.
I was dressed up like Jambi from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, or from Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Yeah. So I'm standing there talking to this man.
Joe a different color too? Was he cherry?
Joe was normal, like toned. He was not painted in full body paint. And I remember him like looking a little bit aghast too when Austin was sitting down to talk with us, because he was like, oh boy, we're gonna interview this girl with Austin just fully painted blue. But no, I instantly loved it. You know, it's walking into Spike's is like such a cozy place. Like, you can't really describe it unless you've been there. And hopefully, I don't know if you've come or you will be coming, you'll get to experience
there's a lot of people listening who haven't been there. So you can sort of describe it. I kind of remember it having like maybe 4 tables, and it's very narrow.
Yeah, I don't know. Well,
it's cozy.
It's cozy. Sure. That's why I said it's very cozy. Yeah. It's not just cozy, but I think it's very typical San Francisco of like the space that you were working with. I think most places, you know, the longer they've been around, whether it be a restaurant, a bar, or like a coffee place, they're definitely suited to their environment. Like, you know, some of my favorite bars and like they're tiny nook places just because that's the way that that's the way they started and that's the way they stayed. Later, I found out that apparently the original Spike's was also like bigger. Like, I guess the wall that's between us and the travel agency it wasn't a thing until like late 80s or something. That's what I've told Evan. I was told.
I need to find out about this.
I don't know if that's a lie or not, but I remember Clark telling me this. So,
well, we've talked about knocking down that wall before, and but then it would kind of, because it's been the same. Like, people come in and the one thing they love, besides the coffee and just, you know, the people, is like that they'll come in and they'll be like, oh my God, I came here in 1988 and this place looks exactly the same. Yeah. It really carries with it that feeling of like tradition. And when you join on as a barista, you kind of have this feeling of like you're fitting into this like greater story of like going way back to the day.
It's a place that it's not asking for you to like, oh, get used to this. It's like, no, this is how it is. Like, are you going to get used to it? Will you be able to hang? Yeah. Or is this just not going to work out for you?
Right. Exactly.
I think it's that type of space. You know, it's that type of like old San Francisco attitude of like, this is how we do things. Are you going to adjust to how we do things? Or are you going to be freaked out by the fact that we have just a thin hallway running across?
I also like the entrance. The entrance area has like a space for a few tables outside, like out on the sidewalk. Mm-hmm. And there's always some locals that are regulars, like hanging out there with their dogs, and like Louis Paws, the basset hound that Roberto has. Like there's just famous dogs there. And then they have a whole wall of dog photos, dogs in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's so much personality. It's like, it can't be contained in that tiny space. It's like literally spilling out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think that's the part of it. You know, you get to know these locals and these people that have come here. We have our regulars at 8 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. It's 4 guys. And in the 2 years that I've worked there, and every holiday that I come back to sometimes do like a special guest shift, I never not see them. And that's like so comforting to me. Like as somebody who is a local who like, you know, has grown up to see that people who like come into these spaces are still able to hang out and like be part of the community and kind of grow with it and not just kind of be erased and put up by some fancy.
And we have a lot of younger, customers that come and are interested in connecting to that, you know, to people who have been around for a long time. But we also have a lot of older customers, you know, that are post-retirement age that have been around, you know, the neighborhood, the Castro since the 70s. We're here through, you know, the whole time of the AIDS crisis. We're here, you know, knew Harvey Milk personally, can tell you stories about the days when this neighborhood was super marginalized and, you know, nobody would want to come into the Castro or be known as coming in the Castro except for the people who lived here. Now, you know, those people don't really, a lot of them they aren't going out to the bars and the clubs and everything. So I think like this is the place, you know, where they can come and sort of pass their story on and be a part of the community. Without having to, you know, do the party life anymore.
And I think, you know, they also share that with us young people. I hate saying that, us young people. But it is kind of true, you know, we are kind of like that next step into what's going to be the future for this community and how it's shaped and the spaces that we hang in. So it's kind of nice for them to share those stories sometimes with us. Like I've definitely built bonds with a lot of our customers, and I mean, I've gotten to know them personally. You know, I've been invited into their homes, just been like, you know, come and have a, you know, come and sit with us and like chat with us. And it's just so refreshing to just have conversation with people outside of, you know, I don't know, like a school setting or like an office setting, or
people
like,
who are just like your peers.
Exactly.
Like,
they're just random people that you can talk to and like build relationships with. And it's not going to be like, oh, why is this weird person talking to me? Like I have my headphones on. I shouldn't be talking to me, you know, but it's nice to kind of have that feeling of, oh, you know, you can step into this place and have a conversation, whether it be with customers or like with the baristas themselves, and just have a nice chat with somebody. And it doesn't have to be.
And it's nice to also, like, when you're working behind the counter, one thing we'll do is like facilitate other people talking to each other. And so I'll like try to like introduce customers to each other, or, you know, kind of like if I'm in a conversation with one person, like find somebody that's across the room and like include them in on the conversation somehow. And kind of like have a more convivial atmosphere, because so many coffee shops you go into these days, it's like everybody's looking at their MacBook, you know, and it's not like that there. We don't even have Wi-Fi.
I was gonna say it's because we don't have Wi-Fi.
That is so smart. That is so smart. And two, like the tables are really close in San Francisco. And I notice this every time I'm home in Chapel Hill. Things are usually like tables like at the Med Deli and everywhere you eat that's wonderful and good. Tables are less than a foot apart. A lot of times they're like 6 inches apart, which means you can't have a private conversation. The person next to you is going to get involved and you're going to make friends. In Colorado, I swear, everything's a foot or more apart. And these people do not talk because of it. Like the way that this space is arranged and the fact that you guys are like acting like party hosts and baristas, like that's what creates like serious tight community, like what you're discussing, where oral traditions are being shared.
Like in Spikes, it's just to like start in on a conversation. Like if people are having a conversation beside you, it doesn't feel weird or rude to just like say, hey, I hear what you guys are talking about and I got something to say. You know, it's like, it happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
I love that. I love that in a coffee shop.
Yeah. So Emily recently left Spikes, and one thing I was wondering about that I've never really asked you personally was how long was that decision brewing, and was that a hard decision for you to make, or was it an easy decision because you just knew in your heart that it was time?
Would I say it was a hard decision? Yes, absolutely. You know, I've definitely lived a life where I've jumped around a lot of jobs and enjoyed that. But I think Spikes is a place where I definitely sat roots down with, you know, the people that I got to know, with like my managers, with Austin, with pretty much with everyone from the staff, customers too. So it's definitely a hard choice, but I wanted to give something different a try. I think I'm somebody who once finds find my comfort place, I don't want to leave it. And something that I wanted to try at least once in my lifetime was to just do something bold and do something completely different, which was really scary because I just graduated from college too. So it's definitely been an adjustment. I think there's been a lot of times where I'm like, why did I do this? This is such a huge mistake. Like, I'm so stressed and tired. But it's also like, it's a lot of fun and it's something different. And it's something that I've never had an experience with. And I do have interest in what I'm working in right now. And I do care about what I do right now, but it's definitely hard. It was definitely something that took a lot of time for me to even want to come to terms to do, just because, like I said, I had such a good community there, and I just really enjoyed my time there. And it's really hard to let go of things where you're really comfortable, because you're, at the end of the day, you're like, yes, this is really comfortable and I love this. Am I growing here? You know, like, am I doing something that I'm going to look back and be like, man, that was awesome?
Yeah.
Or am I just gonna end up being like, this was awesome for such a long time and now it just becomes stagnant and it's become a chore, you know? And I definitely don't ever want to look at something like that in my life.
You never seemed like you got to that point, which is good.
Yeah.
And I think like, as someone, you know, who is in charge of, like, you know, finding new people and hiring and all that kind of stuff, you never want to cease. It's hard to let go, but on the other hand, it's much worse to have a staff that's like bitter, bored, tired, angry, resentful, any of those things. And I think, like, the staff was so great at the time when you left that it actually made it easier because we had such a positive staff. And if you had stayed past your time, ironically, it would have been harder to let go at a time when you should have been let go. Right. So it's kind of a catch-22, but I think when things are going great, it's actually the easiest time for somebody to leave, because then you can bring somebody else new on, and there's an air of positivity, and you bring them in and a good time, and everybody's upbeat.
And, you know, I think also the way that I left on, I want to say, good terms with everybody. That's true. I do have a couple.
She's got a few demerits.
I have a couple demerits that I have to take care of. No, but I left, I think, on such good terms with everybody, whether it be staff, whether it be customers, that, you know, I think that was probably the saddest time of me being there was my last week. Yeah. Because we knew that it was like, oh wow, after Saturday, like she's really gone.
Yeah. I refuse to acknowledge it. I just pretended like nothing was happening.
People went about their days. I think I started telling customers pretty much my actual last day, that it was going to be my last day. And they were like, what? You didn't give us time. And I was like, I just didn't want to make it. I don't know. I'm definitely not somebody that likes to make things about me. Like, I don't like that. So just to even say to people like, oh, I gotta go, or I'm leaving, or I'm doing, like, I don't know. It was definitely a hard choice to do.
I think it's been great that you've come back and done some shifts since then. So it kind of, like, people start, you know, asking about you all the time. And I was like, don't worry, you'll see her again. And then you made good on that. And that I did. I think that helped the transition too for a lot of people, because people really got attached to seeing Emily every morning. And then when she was suddenly gone, it was like, what am I going to do? Like, I've been talking to this girl like every day for 2 years, and now she's gone. But she came back and did some shifts over Christmas and Thanksgiving. Hopefully that was nice. Fun.
So you're working as a beauty advisor now, right? That's what the job that you left Spikes for?
Yes.
And are you working independently or for a company? What's that like?
Yeah, so I work for a company. I work for a beauty company, actually. They are based here in San Francisco. They have warehouses kind of around the country here. And, you know, we basically just are your run-of-the-mill beauty industry consultant, like, in store. We basically, what I do is, if you have any questions on any products that we offer on our site, or if you're having any issues with the website, or with any questions at all, I am your person to go to. So when customers have problems, whether it be like with items, or, hey, Emily, I can't find my package, what's up? Yeah. You know, I'm that person that they reach out to. But it's also been really fun to kind of see how the cosmetics industry is evolving, and how that's kind of the new industry that is kind of leading the world, because there are a lot of women and men, not just women, men too, who are so interested in beautifying themselves and taking care of themselves, whether it be through makeup or just like getting a solid skincare routine. Like the skincare industry and just the beauty industry over the last, I want to say 5 years, has been like a huge boom and revolution. I mean, you go on YouTube now and it's like you can't not see that the leading YouTubers are mostly beauty people who are doing beauty reviews or makeup tutorials or, you know, something beauty related. So it was an industry that I've always kind of had an interest in. And when I was able to look into something that could possibly fulfill both things, but I was also like still within my reach of knowledge, I took it and I was like, let's just give it a try and see if I like this.
So if you could get, like, I'm lazy, I'm not wearing makeup, I won't do it. I'm just too lazy. I don't even really do my hair. But if there was one thing you could add to anybody, like across the board, universal advice, what one thing would you advise people to do?
2 things. Wash your face every night. Wash your face every night, whether it be with a cleanser that's like $5 at the drugstore or something really expensive and fancy. Wash your face every night. It'll turn your life around. And wear sunscreen.
Oh,
okay. Wear sunscreen. I am obsessed with anti-aging, even though I'm only 23.
That's when you're supposed to start.
Exactly. So that's why I'm like, I want to look like Cher. I know Cher's gotten work done, of course, but I want to be eternally frozen.
And then what about bum cream?
Bum cream. It's gonna firm your whole body and make you smell good.
So this is a product that Emily gave to me. We went to our friend Angie's wedding. And she introduced this to me, and it just made me smell really good.
Yeah.
So it was hot and I was like sweaty and I didn't have any deodorant. And she gave me this stuff and it made me smell really good all day. But it's also like, is it moisturizing?
Firming and moisturizing. It's like a really expensive lotion, and you know, it claims to do all these things, but all I think it does is make you smell good.
I think so too.
Like, I think it's just perfume.
All right, well, now we're definitely not going to get sponsorship from Bum Cream, but we'll provide the link in the show notes.
Yes.
So I guess when she showed it to me, I thought, like, am I supposed to put this on my butt?
I thought so too. Originally, when it said Bum Cream, and mind you, that my whole job is to know about beauty products, and I was like, Bum Cream. I'm like, like a rash cream. Like in my head at first I was like
on the baby's butt or something?
Like I was like, it's a rash cream, and I was like, oh, it's a lotion, a real fancy lotion. And right before the trip actually to our friend's wedding, Angie, when she got married, I was like freaking out because I was like, oh, I haven't ever gotten ready for a wedding and like a destination wedding, and like it's hot. Like I've come so unprepared.
We were in Yosemite, by the way, Yosemite Park. So it was, and it was in June.
Right. So it was like sweltering hot. And I was like, what am I going to do? My makeup's not going to stay. My hair it's going to be a whole thing. So I had gone to Sephora, and the lovely people there had sent me home with like a bag full of samples of random things. And I think I must have had like 10 of these in my like overnight bag, and I just started giving them out to people. Yeah. Like I was like, here, you have one. I'm like, this smells really good, so everybody gets to have one.
And then she gave me a giant one, which is going to take me forever to get through, because all you need, this stuff is like atomic grade. Like you just put a little tiny bit on it, and you'll smell like it for a damn week.
I love it. It's so yummy.
So you mentioned before that you grew up here in San Francisco and specifically in the Tenderloin. Yes. And one thing that I've always been interested in is like, I mean, growing up in, where Jodie and I grew up in North Carolina, or really most of the country, like you don't see that much crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But if, a lot of people, like their image of San Francisco is like, fancy wine, fancy cheese, like big yachts and like, trolleys and pretty hills and everything. But when you're here, you really do just see a lot of crazy shit. And Jodie, because you've been here to visit, like walking around the Tenderloin, like, in a block, you're going to see like a 56-year-old man wearing diapers, somebody shooting up. I don't know, like somebody like, so like
people peeing on the streets in the middle of the day.
Yeah, like I mean,
yeah.
I can't even come up with the things that you can't even come up with the things you see.
I mean,
like,
I've seen some things that I'm like, wow,
So,
you
like,
never thought you see people doing that.
So like, how as a child did
Yeah.
the adults around you like? You must have had questions.
Yes.
When you saw these things. So like, how did the adults around you like handle that? Like, did they just handle it matter of factly, or did they warn you,
Right.
or like, how did people approach that?
Well, it really helps that also my parents were quite young, I think, when they had me. As Austin knows,
His mom's my age.
Yes,
Okay.
my mom.
Her mom is my age.
My mom is his age.
Yeah.
So my parents are pretty young. I think.
Pretty young.
They're young. They're young spring chickens. No, so my parents were pretty young when they had me, so they were definitely a little bit more, I think, untraditional than most parents. I also defined myself as like that last generation of latchkey. Like my parents were still cool with leaving me in the house and being like, "You have a phone, call us if something's wrong." Yeah. Like, no big deal kind of a thing. But they were very factual growing up. I think it was something that we never hid from. Like, if I had questions, it was never kind of frowned upon not to ask. If something confused me, or if I was like, hey, so what are drugs? Yeah. Like, I know we talk about why we shouldn't do them, but what are they? So my parents, I've been kind of lucky in that sense that my parents have always been kind of very honest with me about a lot of things just in life in general. And I think that really helped kind of shape where I was living and growing up where I was living, because I never thought of it as, oh, we live in like the weird part of San Francisco, or like the less desirable part. It's more like I live close to everything. I live 5 minutes away from pretty much anything, anywhere I want to go at all times. But no, it was, they were never dishonest or didn't shy away from topics of conversation that I had questions about. I grew up very, close to the community. I went to a program, after school program in the Tenderloin, called Glide, which is part of a bigger organization that actually helps homelessness in the city, specifically in the Tenderloin area. So growing kind of in that neighborhood and just in programs like that helped me view people a little differently growing up too. I think most people that sometimes travel here or didn't grow up here or didn't grow up around homelessness kind of sometimes have biases and may kind of judge people ahead of time. And, I was kind of lucky enough to, growing up, kind of understand that, some people have it rougher in life than others, and some people sometimes may not make the best choices, and sometimes that interferes with how their life is going, and sometimes that's how they end up homeless, or sometimes it's not just maybe they made wrong decisions, that's sometimes how life takes you, and I learned to be a little bit more compassionate and be a little bit more understanding with people, not just kind of judge them and see them as, oh, they
and you can't
are obviously
and you learn
druggies,
you learn that you can't and that was definitely something it took me a while to learn when I got to San Francisco, is that you have to be able to see, if you see somebody with a backpack on and like kind of kind of in a situation where you can kind of look and tell that they're homeless, like you still have to see, you can't, and it's just like anything with biases, you know, you have to learn to see past the bias and like see the individual for their own self, and make your own judgments according to that, rather than like,
and I mean,
seeing the surface, and what's on the surface is situation of homelessness.
And, I think as I've gotten older and, definitely gotten to learn much more about people and, the situations that sometimes people encounter, I've begun to understand, the homelessness problem here in San Francisco, not necessarily as, oh, this is something we have to clean up, or this is something that needs to be, like, we need to get rid of these people, or we need to, it's turned me into a more of a person that's more inclined to be like, let's help these people. Let's find a solution for this problem, and not just kick them out or put, or tell them that they can't sit on the sidewalk or kick them out of businesses. They're, at the end of the day, I think we're all just people still. I think some people are just in a different situation than we are. And I think that growing up in that neighborhood and in that community kind of gave me a little bit, it's definitely always kept me humble in that way of like not letting my position in life or whatever I'm doing kind of derive me from the point that at the end of the day, we're just human beings across the board.
Do you think so growing up here and do you think that the situation has gotten worse since you were a child, or do you think it's about the same?
Yes. I think it's gotten worse in the sense that I think more people would say that it's gotten worse. I think that my neighborhood has kind of stayed the same in the sense, we haven't seen a big growth or decrease. It's just kind of stayed the same across the board. But I think that it's gotten worse in the sense that, I know that a lot of other neighborhoods haven't been as accepting of the homeless problem that we have here in the city, especially in, I want to say, nicer neighborhoods. We definitely are able to see that, homeless populations and camps are moving more towards, Sunset neighborhoods and Golden Gate Park. And, that's definitely becoming a problem there of, where should we let these encampments stay? And should we let them have encampments? And what are we doing about shelters? And how can we, so I think it's definitely gotten worse in the sense that there are fewer solutions and more people, unfortunately, driven to that kind of place, especially with the rents here. I think it'd be very hard for, let's say, a couple of college kids to get an apartment and be able to stay afloat still now more than ever. So,
and yet there's still that need for a lot of people and the Castro is traditionally a pretty tolerant neighborhood and pretty accepting. Traditionally, and especially because, we know that a high number of homeless people do identify as LGBT and come here getting away from, some hard situation at home, possibly abuse, possibly any number of things that would, and yet I think that the increasing amount of encampments and that kind of thing pushed a lot of people to take a little bit of a harder edge with it, even in this neighborhood, to the point where it's kind of become divisive because there's a lot of people who are like, acceptance and healing at any cost, even if you don't want to look at it, these people are here. And then there's people who feel taken advantage of or feel like, that they're being pushovers and that they need to take a harder line. So it's really come to a
it's very divisive. I think that the problem, like you mentioned, has gotten worse. I think it has gotten worse because unfortunately, it has made San Francisco very divisive. I think everybody that's kind of here in the city and like lives and really loves the city is very proud of it, and very much loves it. And, even its ugliness and its beautifulness, we love it all. We love everything that it encompasses. But I think it is definitely becoming a hot topic of conversation when you're with friends or, you're just sitting at a bar or like over dinner and you bring like a prop up, and you definitely kind of start to gauge. I was like, oh, those friends are not cool for that. And you're like, oh, I did not know that was going to open that can of worms. Because at the end of the day, I think San Francisco is very progressive overall, at least from my interactions and the people that I've been so like grateful to kind of had relations with. Everybody's been very open-minded. But it's very interesting to see that some of us, I think, are leaning more conservative on certain issues than others, even as San Franciscans.
Right. And everybody identifies as Democrat, but you'll realize that people's politics are more in the minutia of things like that. Like once you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, you'll kind of like figure out where they lie as a Democrat, actually. Like
it's like you have a Democrat heart, but a Republican wallet.
That can be it. So we could talk about homelessness in the city for hours. So I'm going to leave that there and move on because that is a conversation that's kind of like talking about abortion. We could
we could go on.
We could be here for 24 hours. But so I guess the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about is just switching gears completely.
Yes.
Emily and I both loved podcasts, and that was like one of the things that we totally bonded on, because we went to go see a live podcast together, and we both just that we would talk about it and keep up with some of the same shows.
We'd have like conspiracy theories, or like this happened this way.
Yeah. So the one that we listened to the most at the time was called Up and Vanished, and it was about a girl that went missing in Georgia like 10 years ago, and this guy got on the case, and he was like doing his detective work, for better or for worse. He was completely untrained. Who knows if it was a good thing, but they did break through the case, and now he's on to a second case. But we went to go see it live. But I was curious, what are some podcasts that you've listened to these days? Because I know like most of our listeners are into podcasts, obviously, because they're listening to us. You had mentioned one to me the other day.
Yes. So I like to kind of keep a running list of podcasts. I like to call myself an early podcast lover. I think I was on that board way before people, because I think now it's like a wave, of everybody's got a podcast. Everybody's listening to podcasts. But you're looking at like what hits the top 10 list, and you're like, really? People are listening to this? Like, you're really listening to this on a day-to-day basis? So I do have a couple of ones that I have really enjoyed lately. One of them that I've been really listening to that's been actually really helpful to kind of like work on mental health and all that is called Latinx Therapy. And I don't know if I said so, but I am Mexican. And I definitely grew up with, like I mentioned, really open-minded Mexican parents, but even still then there's a lot of topics that you kind of grow up and you're like, well, I thought we were open-minded. And then you're like, oh, we're not that open-minded. Okay, good to know, Mom. So that's just been like a really cool podcast to like just learn about healing and like learn about why we do things the way we do as somebody who grew up in this culture, and how we can help, break those things and just be better people as a whole. I love that one. I also listened to another one called Conspiracy Theories. It's just all about conspiracy theories, and it's just such a fun, it's like a little fun podcast that I'll like sometimes I'll listen to, and I'll put on my little tinfoil hat and be like, I thought so though. Like,
even if you don't believe that stuff, it's kind of fun to humor it, just to do so.
You're like, what if? It's like, yeah, you're right. What if the Illuminati is kind of pulling strings behind doors? Like, yeah, I want to know.
What's like the most compelling conspiracy you've heard on that show? Like, which one had you?
Boy. Oh, there was a couple really good ones.
She's scrolling through her phone right now, trying to.
Okay, there was a really good one about Marilyn Monroe that I listened to, which was like their first episode ever. And everybody kind of knows Marilyn Monroe, as like a sex symbol and like the blonde. That's all I knew really about her. I knew she's in a couple movies. Yeah. I've watched Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, but she's just a person. Like, it's not very consequential to my life. So I was like, whatever. But I listened to it, and you hear about, people like her story and like the men she was involved with and all the secrets that she possibly had. And it's like, did she die? Did she get killed? And I was like, damn, maybe you're right. I'm like, everybody kind of in that. And it was such a compelling story to listen to because, she got murdered or died or whatnot, and then you have JFK, who she was very closely involved with, and he was murdered, and then you have her being all of a sudden really involved with her other brother Robert, and you're like, okay, like, what's up? Like, maybe something was wrote down with her that she got 2 men killed all of a sudden. So it was just such an interesting can of worms to open, and I was like, there's definitely much to her than we know and we'll ever know, really, but she's a fascinating person. Like, I think she's given a lot less credit than she is owed. I mean, she's super interesting. Yeah, but that one's a really good one. And I think the one that I recommended to.
Is there any episode about the Freemasons?
There is. Oh, yeah. I think there's a whole podcast called Freemasonry or something. I looked into it, but I was like, that's just not my cup of tea.
Oh, that is my thing. That is totally my thing. I was going to say,
a good crime one that I think the last one I recommend to him was Teacher's Pet. And it's an Australian podcast. So it's not even American. It's like Aussie. And it's like, oh, it's so hard to listen to sometimes because you're like, what did she say? Like, rewind.
And this is like one story about.
Yeah, this is just one story. Yeah. This mom went missing sometime in the 80s. She up and vanished. She up and vanished. And, 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 she up and vanished. And it's just, you get to hear about like what led up to her disappearance, and it's obviously the husband, and everybody knows it's obviously the husband. But it's been 20 years, and recently, I think it was about early last year, or no, early this year, end of last year, that he was finally convicted for her murder, like 20 years later.
Wow. And was the podcast helpful? And
people say it is. It's kind of like Up and Vanished, where like they were like, it definitely helped to put
it got people talking, got attention on the story again.
Yeah, for sure. But it's also like super crazy. I am a millennial, so I come from like being super pro this, pro that, like support, women and rights, and, be there for, but back then it's the 80s, and it's, feminists are out there, but it's not a big movement. And it's so funny to see like this poor woman was obviously getting abused, and everybody was like, mum's the word. Like, we didn't see that. So it's so interesting to see like that big change in the last few years, but also to kind of, it's so good to see, to, for the family to get closure. I think that's what really gets me with these podcasts. It's like I enjoy people getting that closure and being able to finally move on from something that they've been.
There's a good one actually that's kind of comical that's about that, called Heavyweight. I don't know if you've ever listened to that one. And every episode is about something that happened in your life that you never really got the answer to. Like there was there's one where like this girl is going through her high school, and she's one of the popular girls, and all of a sudden all the girls stop talking to her. And nobody ever says, like, she never knows why. All these years later, she goes with her son. She's a full ass adult, and she troubles herself about it, and she wants to know, and they track down these girls, and only one of them is actually willing to talk. And they she kind of like disseminates a little bit. She's not like real, she still doesn't want to look bad after all these years. And they do finally do get closure at the end. And so every episode of Heavyweight is something like that. Like there was another one where I don't know if you guys know Moby's album Play, that was really popular in like the late 90s. And there was all this like, there was all this music in the background that was like kind of like I forget what it was, like old timey like blues music from like the Depression era or something. And this guy Moby had borrowed somebody's like album collection and then used all those samples on this very famous album and never returned his record collection. So he's just been heard about this for all these years because Moby never thanked him. Moby never did anything, but like he was the one that introduced Moby to all this music. And so they link up with this guy and they try to like hunt down Moby and find out like why he just like ghosted on this guy. Yeah.
I know. I've listened. I think it's the same podcast where you find out that there was this one girl who got kicked out of her sorority, and she was always like wondering, why did I get kicked out? So she goes on like this wild goose hunt chase with the guy who hosts the podcast. And they're like calling like all the sorority, all the branches, the sorority, everybody's like super hush hush about it, and it ends up being something like super unconsequential. Like I think she got really drunk at a party at one of their like socials, and one of the head girls was like, that just doesn't represent the sorority the right way, so they kicked her out. But they never told her why or anything. They just like the next day they were like, you have to move out of the house, like you're not part of it.
But she had discovered that she was being a fake person the whole time, and that getting kicked out was the best thing that ever happened to her. Yeah,
she was just like, thank God I was putting on this fake persona.
But she didn't really put that together until she got the closure. So because this is about her like coming full circle and realizing that these girls kicking her out was like exactly what needed to happen.
Yeah.
So Jodie, what about you?
I don't know that I have a heavyweight topic, but
do you have some podcasts? Yeah.
Yes. So I love Code Switch because I can never learn too much about other cultures. Do you ever listen to Code Switch? It's NPR.
No, that sounds good.
And it's run by a woman who is a self-proclaimed Puerto Rican and a Black man. And so they talk about all kinds of civil rights issues. I mean, everything from, people who are phobic about transgender people, homosexual rights, women's rights. Like there's never a time I don't learn from that episode. And I'm one of these people that just loves to educate and grow. And I always want to know about something that's not me. you know, I love to expand my perspective that way. That's my all-time favorite. And then pretty close and probably tied with it is Ooktown. Stuart Yoshida is the host of that podcast. It's about ukuleles. So I play ukulele, and Stuart's podcast was so, I love to say this, it was instrumental in my ukulele education. So I learned heaps from him. And then when we got ready to start our own podcast, I reached out to Stuart, and he helped us figure out which kind of microphones to use, how to do these Google Hangout recordings. Like, he really gave us the boost that we needed. And bonus, I can't believe this happened. Like, I screamed out loud last night, but I got an email from him. He wants me, little old me, to be on his podcast. So I'm recording with him on Sunday. And so I am just over the moon that I'm going to be on a podcast with Stuart. And like, I can't think of enough things to say. And I guess I've never really thought about what it's like when somebody asks you to be on their podcast. Like, we just go around asking people all the time. But that's when somebody asks you to do that, like, that's a big honor. Like, I was like, I don't know. My response to him was, get out. Of course I want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, at least for me, podcasts have definitely become a bigger part of my day-to-day operations. Like, if I'm just at the office, like, I want some background noise. Like, I need a podcast. I need somebody to talk to me and like keep me sane. So when I even heard that Austin was even doing this podcast, I was like instantly excited. And I told him, like, if you need a research assistant, somebody to hold a boom mic, help you with the lighting, if you ever need an interviewer, like, I am there. It's just because it's an industry that I don't know much about, but I found myself like absolutely like devouring all these stories, whether it be like a murder podcast or like just random fact podcast or just people talking about a show or recapping what happened on last night's, you know, this or that, you know, and just being a part of it. I think it's like a really fun experience, because I think it's definitely a medium that's taking off with like a lot of speed.
So Emily and
anybody
I, back in the day, like working at Spikes, we had often, well, maybe I had put Emily into this fantasy of mine. So Emily spent most of her life in California.
Yes.
Like pretty much like almost all, right?
Oh, yes,
and,
yes.
California is, you know, it doesn't get real hot. It doesn't get real cold most of the time. There's not a lot of like scary insects. There aren't people like, well, there are like square dancers and stuff like that, but
where?
Not a lot. There's not like freezing cold weather or like huge thunderstorms.
No.
So I had this fantasy of a podcast where like, you know, we get in the car and we drive cross country to all these like weird places around the world or around America. And because Emily is so like articulate and just joyous with her expressions, like get her to react.
Very sheltered. I would say very sheltered too. I am a California kid.
Well, you're sheltered and you're not, because you grew up in San Francisco. So that's
true.
In some sense you're not, but California in some ways is a very, you know, bubble kind of place.
Oh, I'm definitely in a bubble. Yeah.
So if there's anybody out there who really would like to see how Emily reacts to all these different situations, like maybe go to Barrow, Alaska and throw on
go fund me in the link. No.
Yes. If there's anybody who wants to fund that, we're ready for a road trip. Jodie, I think you'd be in for it too.
Totally.
Not even like.
I'll find the square dances for us to visit, because you know I'm a square dancer.
Lovely. Well, the basis of this podcast, I think, or the podcast that we had talked about, was because I watched a movie called Deliverance. Because Austin had the infamous or the famous like little sound bit that the banjo song that they do. And I was like, what is this? Like, we were working, I was like, what are you playing? I was like, what is this? And he's like, oh, it's from a movie, Deliverance. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he's like, you've never watched Deliverance with Burt Reynolds? And I was like, no, I know who Burt Reynolds is, but I've never, what are you, Deliverance? So that same very night, I go home and watch Deliverance, and I come back.
By yourself?
scarred, yes, by myself.
And I told Emily that's exactly how the whole South is.
Like I was like,
watch the
no.
movie of Deliverance, that's what's going to happen to you if you go there.
That is not true. That is not true.
So not only did he ruin the South, he ruined White River rafting. Like he ruined that for me.
So now we have to take Emily to Georgia and go whitewater rafting.
That's the basis for.
We need to take you to have a real experience.
The thing is, I would think I would have such a blast. Like I think, like I said, you know, I love meeting people and getting to know other places, and just, you know, being an open-minded person never hurts anything or anybody. So why not dig deep into that southern?
I'll be the only one
part.
playing a banjo on your trip.
Yes.
So
that way it won't
again,
be scary.
Thunders.
Yes. Take me White River rafting.
That's too funny.
So I never mentioned the podcast that I've been listening to lately. There's one called Knowledge Fight. That's really weird. This guy is obsessed with Alex Jones. The right wing, like,
the weird.
So he's been listening to Alex Jones and is totally obsessed, but he doesn't agree with them. And
he's listening. He's like, hey, you know how you hate watch something?
Yeah.
So he's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
With this guy.
But he goes in and he's meticulous and he dissects and he goes back. So like, you know how these, like, a lot of these, like, crazy ass radio hosts will just throw some theory out and talk about it like it's the truth. Like we're all, like, Obama's giving us all Ebola or something like that. Like when the Ebola thing was happening and people were saying, like, oh, and so what he'll do is he'll go back to, like, an old episode that happened in, like, 2011 and be like, let's see how all this shit holds up now. And, like, how did things really go down? And so it's really neat to go back and look at old episodes and see, like, how much smoke and mirrors a lot of the people in the media and a lot of the blowhards are. Yeah. So I've really enjoyed listening to him because he's funny. He has a co-host who knows nothing about Alex Jones except for what this guy says. And they just go back and kind of, like, discuss, you know, whatever came of this crazy ass theory that he was, you know, hawking a few years ago.
I cannot wait. Like, all I've been trying to say as you were describing this is I cannot wait for the Trump version of this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Who can bear to listen to that?
I would bear to listen to that if somebody's dissecting him this hard.
If somebody's really going back in and just pulling it apart.
And
it'll
showing,
be a
like,
very
the logic.
short podcast. It'll be like, on this day, he lied. On this day, he lied. On this day, he lied.
Or room for, like, a lot of people to finally, like, be like, oh, wow, we listened to 2 years, more than 2 years worth of lies. And it's like, more than 2 years, kids, more than 2 years.
So one other one that I've been listening to that's, like, super current, and I think this is actually, like, high in the charts right now, is Broken Hearts.
Oh, I love that one.
And Angie you recommended and Angie recommended in the same day. Yeah. And I was going to listen to both of them, but then I started listening to that Broken Hearts one because I remembered that story, and I got so sucked into it. And it's about these parents who, two white parents who adopted, like, 6 black children, and they were really good at, like, getting themselves in, like, the media. So like when Bernie Sanders made that speech where the bird comes and lands on his podium, like, her and her whole rainbow family were, like, right behind Bernie Sanders. And there was, like, a famous photograph
with it's this black child hugging a police officer during, like, the Charleston riots, I think.
Yeah.
During the Charleston riots when they were doing a demonstration, and he's the child that's photographed in now, like, the very famous picture of hugging an officer and, like, crying, and you're just like, oh,
and everybody held this family up as, like, this ideal
standard,
but it turns out, like, well, they drove a van off a cliff with all the kids in it, and the whole family died. And so the news story comes out and everybody's like, oh my God, what happened? And so I heard about that story and then I didn't hear anything for months and months and months. And then I heard there was a podcast about it. It's a tragedy, but the podcast is really well made and really, like, gets into, like, what was going on in the family and how, you know, a lot of, like, how, you know, because they really presented themselves as, like, perfect on social media. And it really just demonstrates how, like, there's so much going on behind the scenes that we don't see. And everybody knows that now, but just to see it so, I don't know, made so clear.
it's just so, and I think it's also like, I kind of, Angie said that same thing to me. She's like, I was like telling her, I was like, I'm bored. There's nothing uploaded. And she's like, listen to this. And I heard it too. And I was just sitting there and like, just listening to these stories of, you know, these women kind of had put up the perfect facade for the world to see. And it just goes back to showing you like the system and like, wow, you just reevaluate a lot of your choices too, I think,
and how our how, you know, it's kind of like with a lot of things, like how people who abuse children like often will move from community to community when it starts to catch up to them, and how we don't have any way to follow up. And that's what these women did, is they kind of like shuffled around, and you know, and kind of like the priests that get moved around from parish to parish. You know, and how we don't have any sort of like national child abuse registry that like follows when, you know, somebody does something like that that's that awful. So I think there's a certain amount of activism behind this podcast and trying to get us to be better at protecting children who are abused in this way.
And just to like intervene, I think kind of similar to the podcast that I mentioned earlier with like the teacher's pet and nobody wanting to get involved. I think it's definitely a call to action for more people. You know, if you feel something isn't going right, or you kind of have a certain doubt about something, I think it's definitely the era to question it and to like offer your help if you can, you know, because you could prevent things from like this to happen. I think that's what that whole podcast, like when I was listening to it, all I was thinking was, have I been in this situation? Like, have I seen perfectly happy families interact with me and you know, go to their homes and be friends with and go to dinner with, and then secretly they're like doing horrible things to their children? Or I don't know.
A lot of times, like when these things are happening, like with the Larry Nassar case where he abused like hundreds of these gymnasts, and you hear this story, like it makes the big news for like 2 or 3 days, and they kind of drop it, and you're left with this curiosity about how did that actually happen? How did those parents miss that? And they NPR released a 6 or 7 episode podcast called Believed, and they walk you through all of the details. So by the time you're finished with that story, I mean, it's horrible, it's gruesome, it's awful to listen to, but if you can stand it, at the end, like all those questions that you have answers, and then you are a more informed person. You know, so that's what you're saying. Like it really does like level the playing field so we can all truly understand what's going on with these tragic stories. Otherwise, you know, like tragedies that happened before podcasting was available, you just rely on what journalists think is important, and journalists decide what's important based on how much money the newspaper's making on it. You know, so podcast really levels the playing field, so anybody can give you any kind of information, and you can just devour as much of it as you can stand.
I'm glad that it's finally coming into fruition as like when as a medium. When it first, you know, like, I mean, podcasts started really in like the mid 2000s. And at the time I was like, wow, this has a lot of potential, because it takes out the people who are watching the gates and like lets people speak directly to people. And instead of having like any kind of filter or anything like that, it really democratizes that whole process. And I'm surprised it took this long, but I think it's really amazing that it's taken off like it is now, and that people are able to produce their own content and bring it directly to people without that sort of like censoring board or power structure trying to keep your voices quiet.
I think we've also I think this is like the at least prime time that I've been able to like really explore my curiosities. You know, I think that podcasts are kind of an encyclopedia to things that you didn't know that you were interested in, you know, whether it be like crime or baristas right now, or, you know, ukuleles, literally anything. You're just like, I did not know that there was a world of education and things for me to be exposed to if I just put on my headphones and listen to a show for like 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, we're definitely getting used to like being able to be turned on and be learning like all the time. which is
and
cool.
it's global. You know, it's not just the United States. It's not just people who can afford cable TV or internet. Like, you know, we are finding, when Austin and I look at the data, it's people all over the world listening to this barista podcast. And there are people drinking coffee, and I know it's crazy. It's like, we love to watch those stats roll in, and it's just, it's global.
Yeah. And I think, and at the end of the day, when you're listening to a podcast, you're not just listening to something because you want to find out about things. You're sharing your interests with somebody, and you're like letting yourself be geeky. You know, like if you're into this sort of niche thing, there's a podcast for you, and you can listen to people talk about it and discuss it, and you don't have to feel so weird. Or if you don't have friends that are into certain things, like for me with the true crime stuff, my two best friends that I've been friends with for like ages and ages find it incredibly creepy. They're like, girl, I do not want to be listening to a murder podcast when I'm walking home. And I'm like, well, I do. You know, and it's like, I finally get to kind of learn about my interests and share them with somebody who's not like judgy or like being like, what are you Googling? Why are you Googling?
Yeah, because the host is like right there with you.
Yeah. So I'm just like, okay, cool. They know it. They're not being weird about this at all.
So we always end our podcasts by asking what your 3 favorite coffee shops in the world are. And actually, we're gonna try to reach out to those. Like each time somebody says 3, explain what you want to do, Jodie.
Yeah, I just started having this thought. I largely are populating this podcast, and we have asked our listeners to give us ideas of other people to interview. So far, no one has submitted an idea. So I thought, when we get these lists of 3 coffee shops from someone who is being interviewed for the podcast, I'll write those down. Maybe you know somebody who works at that podcast. If you don't, it doesn't matter. I'll reach out to those coffee shops and see if they have a barista that we could interview, so that, you know, we would have 3 possibly like new coffee shops to draw baristas out of with every interview.
It sucks because my first one would be Spikes. I want somebody else to come on the show so I can be nosy and listen to them too.
That's okay.
Oh boy, that's a good question. I will have to admit that apart from Spikes, I don't go and get to know my baristas all that often. Just because before I wasn't working at Spikes, like I was working at another coffee shop.
Yeah.
And now Spikes, like I rarely go in to go get coffee.
But do you have any other places that you treat yourself to? Where do you go like when you want to treat yourself?
Okay, when I really want to treat myself, I go to this place up the block from my house, and they did a lavender latte, which I have been trying to recreate times and times, and I've been like boiling my lavender stems and like making my sugar water, and I can't recreate it anywhere else. But they make a delicious latte, and I will get back to you on the name because I can't think of it right now. I know exactly where it is, but I can't think of the name. It's right on Hyde and Post.
All right, I'm gonna
Hyde and Post.
While you're talking about your possible 3rd one, I'm gonna find it.
And my possible 3rd one, again, I'm gonna be very San Francisco and say not a coffee shop, but a boba shop. So here in San Francisco, I don't know in Colorado if it's taking off yet, but there are a lot of boba shops here, like milk tea, which is usually like a black tea with milk and like tapioca balls. Really, 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 really love boba tea when I can get to have it. So, and I do have a person that works there currently. I don't know if she'd be interested in being interviewed, but I can definitely ask. But it's Boba Guys. It started here in the city. They had one shop in the Mission, and they've like branched out pretty much everywhere in the city now. I think they have up to like 4 shops here in San Francisco, and they have 2 in LA and 1 in New York. So they've been like kind of blowing up and just really taking off. So it's really cool to kind of see. Yes, it's called Milk Bean.
Milk Bean.
Yes.
Got it. Go get your lavender latte at the Milk Bean.
Which is funny because there's another coffee shop right around the corner from Milk Bean called Let's Jam Cafe.
Where's that?
Let's Jam.
Never heard of it.
Okay. It's not Let's Jam. It's Milk Bean.
But they're probably both wonderful.
Yeah. Yes, but definitely. I think if you guys ever want to like look into two people who did their thing, Boba Guys is a really cool place to do it. I always like talk about them like I'm their PR manager or something. But no, the hosts are just like two college kids that were making boba out of their parents' garage.
Yeah.
Like, and then they just turned it into an idea, and now they have a ton of shops, and they're just growing and growing.
That place has a line like you've never seen. Like constantly all day.
Constantly. Like I would go from more, like sometimes I will get off from like my morning shift and go get boba, and I'd come back and they'd be like, it took you 45 minutes. And I was like, yeah, half of that was like waiting in the line.
Wow. That's like the Sushi Rito in the financial district.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I was on one of those tour buses and I saw that line wrapping around the building. I was like, I'm having lunch there tomorrow. I'm going to wait in the line and do it.
Go after like 3 o'clock. No one.
That's what happened. I got off that little tour bus thing. It was late, and there was no line, but it was delicious.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Sushi Rito.
I like that place. Yeah,
it's good stuff. Well, as we end this episode, we want to thank you again, Emily, for being with us today, and thank all our listeners for joining us. I want to remind you guys, we want to hear from you. We want to know if you know a barista or a coffee industry expert that needs to be featured on the show. Write to us. Tell us your big ideas at info@baristaunfiltered.com. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. We totally appreciate all you subscribers on YouTube. And if you haven't yet subscribed on YouTube, please do that.
Please subscribe. We're at like 30-something now.
Woo. Yeah, we got to get to 100 so we can get our fancy URL. So
even if you do it for like a week and then you
unsubscribe.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
Do it. I'll tell all the young millennials to subscribe.
If you have time to write up a review, just anything quick but meaningful, because meaningful is important. Apple's iTunes podcast app needs your reviews, and that really helps us get found. We have podcast patrons now through Patreon. Shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for supporting our podcast. And that link is patreon.com/baristaunfiltered. You can donate any amount and any kind of schedule. So before we sign off, I'll just tell you again, I'm Jodie Lee, and
I'm Austin Miller.
Austin Miller. Yes. Y'all be good. Stay caffeinated. And we will, we're actually recording a podcast tomorrow. AJ Berg is going to be on our podcast tomorrow, episode 15. And then episode 16 is Angela Matute. Am I saying her name right?
Matute.
And she has been referred to a lot today as the Angela in the stories that Emily's been telling. So, we'll interview her on the 31st, and I do a pretty quick turnaround, so we should have that available on the 31st or February 1st. All right, y'all.
That's exciting.
Bye.
All right.